Hello and welcome back to my channel, Civil War Reports. I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. And before I get going in on this episode, I have to apologize for being so late in between episodes. I promise I will do my best never to do this again to you. Go almost 2 months in between episodes. But hopefully you'll understand my reasoning behind that and forgive me. It all started with Valentine's Day. That's when I had my last cancer treatment. And this has happened to me in the past. Had a bad reaction to it. Suffered a bout of depression. Not helped by the fact that both my cars decided to break down. My everyday ride, my Saturn, which I love driving. A couple things broke down on it at once. Then my backup car, my 99 Camaro. I'm a big Camaro guy, I love those cars. Hopefully GM will bring them back one day, bring back the old Camaro. That also broke down. So when you got two cars and both of them broke at the same time, on top of the depression which I have suffered from in the past, shortly after getting these the chemo, sent me into quite a tailspin. Luckily, and I got to give a shout out to this to my buddy Josh. Thank you for repairing both cars quickly for me. Big shout out to you. And then, unfortunately, just as I was getting ready to do this episode, my mom passed away on April 13th from Alzheimer's. Over a 5-year battle. She was diagnosed shortly before the pandemic began. Believe it or not, that's been over 5 years now. And that delayed things. So, those are the reasons why this episode took so long. Between cancer treatment, induced depression, and then mom's passing away. So if you would like to do something in honor of my mom, please. She did have cancer at one time in her life, but she beat that, thankfully, and she passed away from Alzheimer's. If you want to make a donation to any cancer organization or to Alzheimer's research, please do so in honor of Janet Kopak, K-O-P-A-C, Janet Kopak. I would really appreciate that. Well, it won't help my mom. It could help somebody else down the road, and that's what's important. All right, for today's episode, hopefully this was worth the wait. This goes out to my Southern viewers, my Southern friends, because I think you'll like this episode. And I think it's going to make a few wokesters upset, because this is an episode about something you will not learn in school, particularly in northern schools. I heard about this gentleman, I heard about this book, and then I was going through a local library. They were having a book sale, and I got to tell you, not just history books, but you can get a lot of great books when libraries are getting rid of their old inventory to bring in new stuff. Heard about this book. Here we go. It is called The Barber of Natchez. This is a book. It's based on the diary records of William Johnson. Who was he? Well, he was a freed. He was born a slave, but he was freed later on, and he did very well for himself as a free man. And not only did he do well for himself as a barber and as somebody who dealt in real estate and in businesses and in lending money, because he had it to lend, he was what they called back then mixed race, what we would call biracial today. His mother was black. His father, which is not mentioned in here, so probably unknown, was a white man. So he's a mixed race. And he did very, very well for himself once he was freed. And not only that, and this is going to be very upsetting to some people out there because it's going to blow the narrative away, he owned slaves. Yes, that's right. A man who was considered black owned slaves. So, let's get into this book. Let's learn about the Barber of Natchez. I'm going to apologize to my friends down in Mississippi. Growing up, I never heard of Natchez. First time I heard about this town, I've never been there. I'm not sure if it's a big city now, or medium-sized city, or still a small town. I really don't know. But the first time I heard about it was when I was reading up on Andrew Jackson. The people who live in and near Natchez probably know this story. Andrew Jackson, when he was a young man, fell in love with a woman named Rachel, and she was married, and they escaped to Natchez because at that time it was not part of the United States. It was still Spanish-held territory, if I remember correctly, and they got married there and came back to Tennessee, which was part of the United States. And not much was thought about it until he ran for president in 1828, and all of a sudden that story resurfaced, and poor Rachel was labeled a whore, among other things, and it infuriated Andrew Jackson, because the one thing you did not ever want to do was to insult his beloved wife, Rachel. So that was the first time I ever heard of Natchez. But I heard about this story, heard about this book years ago, and like I said, I found it at a library used book sale, picked it up right away, only $2, and well worth it. So let's get into the story of William Johnson, the Barber of Natchez. All right, so what can we say about William Johnson? Well, as I mentioned already, he was biracial, or what they would have called back then mixed race, or a half-breed, insulting terms. Biracials, obviously, much kinder words to use to describe somebody if we're going to just look at them based upon their race. And he was born just with the name William. He had no last name. And his mother was a slave. She was the slave of a white man also named William Johnson. I got no indication from the book that William Johnson, the former slave, was the son of William Johnson, the white slave owner. But William Johnson appears to have been a very benign master. He did free the mother, along with a few other slaves. And he did not free William the slave. William the slave had to buy his freedom, which was not uncommon back then. And when he was freed, he needed a last name, so he took the last name of his now former master, which was also very common. During the days of slavery, slaves usually just went by one name. And if they did take a last name, it was usually the name of their master. So William Johnson, the slave, buys his freedom, and he takes his former slave master's name. So there are basically in this book two William Johnsons. William Johnson, the white slave owner. William Johnson, the biracial former slave. And I'm going to be a little honest about this book here. It's kind of dry. It's not my kind of read. Basically, the authors here, Edwin Adams Davis and William Ransom Hogan, they have a tough task, in my opinion. They're taking a diary and taking business records and trying to make a book out of it. And that kind of stuff usually lends itself to being a rather, in my opinion, dry read. Not that this book is not informative. It's very informative. Just not my kind of read. I went from the last episode where I read the book on Alonzo Cushing, which was a book I had a hard time putting down, dealing with my medical issues and my mom passing away. This was kind of a hard book to pick up and dive into it, but very, very informative. The kind of book, like I said, has information in here that will upset many wokesters. All right, so what can we say about him? He was born a slave, biracial, buys his independence. He then becomes a barber. And at a young age, he's taught the trade of barber, and he ends up opening up his own business. And he's quite the businessman. Not only does he offer shaves and haircuts, this is pre-Civil War, men were generally clean shaven, and he also expands his business into also a bathhouse. Because let's remember, back then, hygiene was not as important to people as it is today. But there were times when men wanted to cleanse themselves, and not only could they get a bath at his barbershop, he also dealt in scents. So you could add a fragrance to the bath water, so not only do you come out clean, but also smelling better, substantially better than when you went in. So he shows very early on that he's constantly thinking about business, how to make money. And he does become a husband, does become a father. He ends up having 6 kids. But not only is he constantly thinking about business, this book also points out that he does take time to enjoy life. So what were some of the things that William Johnson loved to do? Well, he loved to go hunting. He loved fishing. He loved horse racing. He also loved to gamble. He seemed to bet on just about anything he could, whether it have been horse racing or who was going to win an election. He just liked to bet. Sometimes he won, sometimes he lost. I don't think he had a gambling problem. It doesn't talk about him losing any great sums of money. I think he just liked the thrill of gambling. So even if it was small amounts, it sort of kept him interested. He also was involved in real estate. He was buying land. He had more than one barbershop after time. He would expand his business. He would hire slaves to work both as barbers in his shops. He also bought some farms. He had slaves working his farm with a white overseer. Now, I know there's going to be people that don't want to hear this because it's going to destroy the narrative of what the South was like before the Civil War. But, sorry, this is what's written in the book. He speculated in land, and he became a rather wealthy man. And despite the fact that he was considered a colored man, which was a term that was used back then, he did have a small fortune, shall we say, and people would come to him to borrow money. White people would come to him to borrow money, which he lent out. And I think this man had a lot of integrity, and he was very honest. And it's written in here that he really only had to take people to court very few times to ever get his money back, of which every time he won in court and ended up getting his money back to people he lent it to. So he was well respected. Okay? Keep in mind, because of the fact that he was biracial, because of the fact that he had a black mother, he was not considered half white. He was a black man at that time. All right, this is going to make the woke people a little happy, but I'm going to point it out. Because he was biracial, because he was half black, he was not allowed to vote, and he was not allowed to hold public office. Yeah, that is shameful. He was, a well-respected man in the town, but he was not allowed to vote. He was not allowed to hold public office. And yeah, that is something that will be forever a black eye on the American story. sad to say. And he did continue to cut hair, even with all these other ventures that he had going on. The farm, the real estate ventures, the lending of money. He still continued to cut hair. And one thing that I guess he enjoyed was that being there at the barbershop, he could hear gossip. I mean, look today, gentlemen, you go to a barber, get your hair cut, what's going on? People are talking, all right? And he would hear it. And from what I can understand from this book was he really didn't engage, but he liked to listen. He liked to hear what was going on. You go to a barbershop, just sit there, wait for your turn, and you're going to hear today anything from the latest sporting events to politics to complaining about the price of groceries or the price of gasoline. You're going to hear something. And he took a lot in. So he got to realize what was going on in town. He would hear news as to when a piece of real estate was coming up for sale, or who was courting, which gentleman was courting what lady, who died recently. So he could pick up business tips in many ways. You know, if somebody died, maybe their house was going to go up for sale. Somebody was getting married, well, you know, maybe they were going to be selling stuff or looking to buy stuff. Now that they're a new happily married couple. So being in that position as the town barber, and a well-respected one, he could pick up on business tips. One thing I found very interesting about this book is he mentions in his diary that Henry Clay, the great compromiser, congressman turned senator, ran for president a couple times, never won, came through Natchez, and found it kind of interesting that when he showed up there the first time, and apparently he might have made 3 trips to Natchez, people didn't seem to make a big deal about his arrival, which is kind of interesting when you consider without 21st century distractions, politicians were in many ways movie stars and heroes. You know, without television or the internet or even sporting events on TV to distract people, people were much more focused on politics of the day. And there's no doubt about it, Henry Clay, the great compromiser, the man who gave us the compromise of both 1820 and 1850, coming to your town should have been a big deal, but not in Natchez at that time. What can I say about this book? This paperback version is about 260 pages, give or take. And I don't envy the authors because I know from firsthand experience it is not fun going through diaries and journals. I mean, what they had to do was go through this man's diary, but mostly through his business records and try to create something that's, you know, really exciting to read. The information in here is plentiful. I mean, I could probably spend an hour on this episode just talking about all the little bits of information that was documented, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wrap it up now and just say this is if you want a book that's loaded with information about what it was like to be a black businessman, slave owner in Mississippi in the antebellum period, this is the book for you. If you are woke and you don't want to learn the truth, then don't buy this book. Don't read it. We don't know exactly when William Johnson was born. It's estimated sometime in the year 1809, which sadly was not uncommon back then. The births of slaves, if they were recorded, sometimes that information would get lost as a slave was sold from one owner to another. But we do know this much about him, that on June 17th, 1851, Johnson was murdered by another biracial man. Johnson was murdered in front of his son, and it was over a dispute about some land. And so Johnson doesn't live until the American Civil War, but his story is very much a part of the Civil War story, because he was a slave owner. Because there's so many people out there that think that's what the war was about, slavery and only slavery, which is not true, but I'll throw that bone to those people who believe that. But he was a businessman. And had he lived, had he not been murdered, and again, he was about, 42 years old when he was murdered, so good chance he would have lived for another 10 or more years, lived through the Civil War. Would have been interesting to see where his allegiance would have fallen. But he, like I said, was killed on June 17th, 1851. And that's where the story of the Barber of Natchez comes to an end. And I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Watched a documentary on Andrew Jackson. I believe it was narrated by Martin Sheen, the gentleman who played General Lee in the movie Gettysburg. And that's how he pronounced the name of the town. So if I am mispronouncing it, to any of my friends and fans and all that down there in Mississippi, I apologize. You know I'm kind of bad with names. So, all right. Again, sorry that this episode took so long to get to you. Hopefully better days are on the horizon. So, all right. Well, for Civil War Reports, I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. Do my best to never have this much of a gap in between episodes again. Until next time, thank you for watching. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button. Give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends. Let them know about this channel and ask them to subscribe as well. If you like, you may leave a question or a comment below, and perhaps I will answer your question in a future episode of Civil War Reports. Until next time, please keep the history alive.